series. This afternoon, we are delighted to welcome Sonia Joshi. She is Associate Director of U.S. Programs at Institute for Sustainable Communities, ISC. Sonia works with the leaders of color, community organizations, and local and regional governments to prioritize and infuse racial equity into climate resilience. It's a very important topic. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Lake Superior State University and a master's degree in human dimensions of fisheries and wildlife with a specialization in gender, justice, and environmental change from Michigan State University. Before joining ISC, Sonia spent 4 years as the inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager for the School of Environment and Sustainability, SEAS, at the University of Michigan, facilitating dialogues across social identities, privilege, race, and power. Prior to her time at SEAS, Sonia spent 11 years as program manager and outreach coordinator in a joint position between the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network and NOAA, Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory. There, Sonia managed the multi-state NOAA, that is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, Center of Excellence for Great Lakes and Human Health. Now, welcome, Sonia. We have about 40 minutes or so, 35, 40 minutes, and then after that, we'll have Q&A. The stage is yours.
Great, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the invitation to be here with you all today. I am dialing in from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is located 45 minutes west of downtown Detroit in Michigan, on the lands originally known as Michigami. So this is lands that are originally the lands of the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi people. And so how I approach my work is that first, I just want to center and honor those who came before me and recognize that I am privileged to be able to work and live on this land. And so I'm really pleased to speak to you today about the work that we do at the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and in particular, the work that we do within our United States portfolio, which it centers equity in community-led climate resiliency work. And just to give you some framing, the Institute for Sustainable Communities, we are an international non-governmental organization that focuses on addressing climate, and we work to support local leaders throughout the country to address economic, social, and environmental challenges. Right now, our portfolio focuses on the United States, and we have a number of programs that we administer, and I have colleagues that are located throughout Asia. So in particular, these ones that are highlighted here. We have work in China, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And then in terms of the goals of our work, we really focus on advancing clean, equitable, and climate smart communities, cities, and regions within the United States and in Asia. And I do want to just mention to you all that we also focus on manufacturing and climate smart manufacturing, but that is specific to our Asia work. And our priority areas are centered around working with factories and within manufacturing, as I mentioned, community resilience, and cities. And how we do that is that we are focused pretty heavily on facilitation. So we serve in our roles throughout ISC as being the conduit of being able to make and establish partnerships across different sectors to focus on building capacity of the communities and the partners that we work with, and to provide technical assistance to all of our partners. And we do that to increase knowledge and skills, to strengthen institutional effectiveness, to really forge connections, realizing that it isn't necessarily one sector or one group that has all the answers to address economic, social, and environmental issues, and really just to curate and test solutions. And so this dark green area is where we really center our work to build out and realize resilient and sustainable communities for all. And so what I want to do is I want to lead you all through a story that is a visualization in some regards to really crystallize the work that we do. So I want you all to just picture this. The bikers didn't realize when they started their nearly 2,000-mile journey from Missoula that they would have to deal with rain for 10 days straight during the first 2 weeks, snow in June, and 8-foot snowdrifts. They were self-sufficient, with each biker carrying their own tent, cookware, food, gear, and other essentials. After crossing the Yellowstone and Little Bighorn rivers, they were tired and hungry and only halfway to St. Louis, where their bike trek would end. And they still hadn't got to the grueling 200-mile trek through Nebraska's notorious sandhills. So I want to ask you all to just really share with me your mental picture. What do you all think was the purpose of this bike ride of these individuals? Anyone?
Anyone? Unmute, and answer if you can.
Hi, Sonia, it's Kelly. I think that they were writing to promote a certain campaign.
Okay. Anyone else agree? Was it for a campaign? Other thoughts? And know that there is no wrong answers. This is really just to share what your mental picture was as I was sharing that story with you all. What did you picture in terms of what these bikers looked like, what gender, race, what visualizations came up for you all?
May I take a hazard? I think there were women, black bikers. Okay. Am I correct?
And what makes you envision?
I mean, when you usually think of bikers, you have a particular picture out there, what bikers normally are, because that's the way people are trained to think. Okay. So I'm just hazarding a guess there. I could be wrong.
How about for others? Agree, disagree? Again, there's no right answer or wrong answers.
Well, when you say bikers, are we talking about people riding motorcycles or bicycles?
Bicycles.
Yeah, okay, bicycles. That's want to make sure because it could be motorcycles too. But my image is that there actually are bikers on bicycles. But I'm thinking of young people because of the trek that we're talking about. I imagine sort of young, maybe mostly white people who ride, who are outdoorsy type, who, with the tents and, and they do this all the time and they're doing it for some kind of cause.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Well, I would say that some of what folks are, have mentioned, in particular the last, young, generally white, kind of outdoor enthusiasts, these are usually images that come to mind for folks, in particular because of what we might be socialized into, within society. We don't necessarily think of folks that might be heavier set as being people that would be riding bicycles for a 200-mile trek. And this is all kind of validated through social, what we see in society and through the news. But the group that I was actually describing to you is the 25th Infantry Bicycle Corps of the Buffalo Soldiers of the United States Army. And in 1896, they were commissioned by Congress to go on this excursion to test the ability of the bicycles that they are using in these pictures, which are called Spalding bicycles, that are 59 pounds of solid steel. And the purpose of this trek was to test the practicality of using these bicycles for military use in mountainous country. So it wasn't for a campaign, it wasn't for a specific cause outside of just seeing if these bicycles could be used for military or mountainous terrain by the military. And so the reason why I bring this up to you all is that within ISC, when we talk about centering equity, we really recognize and want to acknowledge racism within the United States and the impact that racism has had on the erasure of stories such as what I just shared with you. And that erasure also erases the contributions of people who have been, impacted and might have knowledge that could help address a lot of our climate issues and sustainability issues, not just within the United States, but throughout the world. So for us, centering equity really centers on lifting up and supporting communities of color. We have gone through a journey for the past several years, and we're very deliberate about ensuring that the U.S. programs team, the folks that have been hired, are robustly have tremendous skill sets when it comes to addressing climate inequities and climate injustices, but also that we are reflective of the communities in which we serve, because we want to lift up all communities of color. And so our work centers on shifting the narrative of what climate leaders look like. And I'll dig into this a little bit more. But the reason why is because when we think about climate change and climate impacts, in particular, not just in the United States, but globally, it is communities of color and lower income neighborhoods that are most disproportionately impacted by climate. And this isn't something that's new. This is something that's been happening historically as well. In the United States, we know from research that Black Americans are 52% more likely than white Americans to live in urban heat islands. And this is unfortunately a legacy of governmental redlining. And we also know that issues of aging infrastructure and housing are being exacerbated by climate extremes. And for example, within South Carolina, in particular in the coastal areas, and when we're thinking about climate change and rising sea levels, folks in South Carolina were denied flood insurance because of not being able to elevate their home. The challenge is that the costs of elevating their homes start at $20,000 for a 900 square foot house. So when you're thinking about lower income neighborhoods, that is something that is not sustainable for them. And so these are many of the reasons why we focus on centering equity. And I also just want to point out that there is a significant wage gap between white Americans and Black Americans within the United States. This statistic is specific to Boston area families, but in 2015, the median net worth within Boston for white families was $247,500 compared to $3,020 for Puerto Rican American families and $8 for Black Americans. And this is just a snapshot that I took from issues that were occurring last summer. But when we're thinking about those that are most impacted by climate, it seems to be occurring most in communities of color. urban heat islands and where, there's energy burden and energy insecurity is occurring primarily in Black neighborhoods. This image here of Detroit, Michigan, this is something that occurred several times. Only once it hit national news within the past summer, but there were several significant floods that occurred within the city of Detroit over the past summer. And so when we talk about those communities who are most impacted, our framing comes from really utilizing a framing of climate justice. And so that is, and just to give some context, is for us, when we talk about climate justice, we use the approach that working class communities of color who have experienced the most harm should be at the center of decision making when it comes to addressing, what the solution should be for them. And really what that requires is for policymakers, as well as for folks like ISC and other people who are involved in climate, is to acknowledge the expertise of frontline communities in creating solutions to protect and preserve, their quality of life. And so this is a framing that we utilize. We center our work on lifting up and supporting those that are most impacted by climate change. And then the other framing we use is to focus on resilience. And that is to give kind of more of a context of just maintaining an intact core in the face of change. So we know within the communities that we work in that mitigation is now it's too late. So we see resilience as being a bridge between mitigation and adaptation, and really allows for more holistic and systemic interventions that really will allow for the capacity of a system to be maintained. And so our approach is that we work specifically with community-based organizations that are led by people of color, and we focus on building their capacity and being able to support them to address climate injustices. So we receive funding from foundations as well as from the government, and what we do is we re-grant our funds to communities that are being impacted the most. So we focus within communities of color where we know the work is most needed, but may not necessarily be happening. And then the other thing we do is we focus pretty heavily on connecting across communities. So issues that are occurring within New Orleans, they are connected with folks that are having similar issues in the Bronx to have more national peer-to-peer learning opportunities. And then we serve as a strategic thought partner. We know that the communities that we work with have the solutions. Maybe they don't have necessarily the connections to be able to amplify their message out, or maybe they need some support to learn a little bit more on how to get engaged in policy. So we're there just really to assist in those regards. And also our approach is to tell stories. So within the United States, our programs fall into kind of two through lines. So we focus on community-led resilience, which really is to assess and support communities with highest need. And we focus on co-designing strategies that the communities themselves define. And then, as I mentioned, we deliver capacity building and technical assistance and focus heavily on community influence and power building. And then we also work with community and governmental collaborations. And this is intentional to help integrate communities across the region and to break down governmental and policy silos. And what we've been finding is that, in particular with more city and local governments, is that they want to be involved more in centering equity in their work, but are not sure how. So we really leverage resources and relationships to help foster that journey for them to be able to center equity within climate issues. So just to give a framing of the work that we're doing, we work currently in 39 communities across the United States. We have 4 programs that I have listed here, which are the main portfolio of our work that we're doing that is focused on community-based organizations. And one of our flagship programs is the Partnership for Resilient Communities. And that work focuses on building out a national network of climate leaders of color. And we're really intentional about ensuring that when folks think about climate leadership, that it's inclusive of everyone that is working to address climate injustices within their communities. So the communities that we work with and our partners that are part of the Partnership for Resilient Communities are installing green infrastructure to address significant flooding issues that are being exacerbated because of climate extremes. They are developing clean energy, solar resilience hubs within their communities to address energy burden and energy injustices and housing insecurity whenever there's big rains or when there's huge heat swells. Generally, some of these communities do not have access to air conditioning, or the power will go out when there's extreme rain events. So at least with having resilience hubs, there's community centers where people can go, where they can serve as cooling centers, or in the wintertime serve as heating centers. And then as part of the Partnership for Resilient Communities, we also have a workforce development component where people who are burdened and do not have access to many careers are able to get trained in being able to install solar paneling for solar resilience hubs, and also are trained in installing green infrastructure so that they could be contributing to a clean, green energy workforce. And so, as I mentioned, the work of PRC, the Partnership for Resilient Communities, is centered on addressing urban flooding, energy inefficiency and burden, and urban heat island effect. And our focus is that we focus on providing technical assistance and training to our partners to build their leadership skills and to build their capacity so that they are present more often and able to participate in decision-making processes within their communities, and they're able to address the issues that are most salient within their communities related to climate inequity. And this is just more specifically where our PRC partners are located. I'll mention that 7 of our partners have clean energy solar resilience hubs. We also have 7 partners, so some of them are overlapping, have green infrastructure installations that they have to address urban flooding within their communities. And I do want to just mention that we are able to be able to not only just provide access in terms of just the technical assistance, but capture stories. And unfortunately, because of the way that I'm showing these slides, I can't show this short video of the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative of their Resilience Hub. I'll share that out with you all. But the neat thing is that they've converted a former USO club as being their resilience hub. So there's a lot of history within this building as being one that the USO, their African American veterans were utilizing as their space. And so they've retrofitted this building to become their resilience hub. And now it's become a thriving place within the community where people are going to be able to take classes. Community resilience hubs, these are places where people can get job training, they can go for meals. And so we're really proud of the work that Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative have done. This site in particular, their Resilience Hub, has been recognized within the city of Richmond as being a historic site, and they've actually applied for this to be recognized as a national historic site as well. And then the other thing I just want to share is within New Orleans, just pictures of the before and after of some of the flooding that keeps occurring. And this isn't specific to Hurricane Ida. Will occur whenever there's regular rainfalls. And you can see right here, there's a person walking down the street with an umbrella. And so as a result of the green infrastructure installations that we were able to support them through, they were able to reduce within this neighborhood in particular, 18,000 gallons of water per rain event. And this picture right here on the top is their newest installation from over the summer, North Claiborne Avenue. And then this is the picture of all of their green infrastructure installations. And what I'll mention is that when green infrastructure gets installed, these areas also, not only do they help to absorb the water and reduce flooding, but then they become community gathering spaces within the community. And it becomes a space where there's more shade. So it's reducing temperatures within the community too. And so it's helping to change and redress the urban heat island effect within communities. And finally, I do want to share, because, of speaking to you all in South Florida, that we have been working for the past 10 years with the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. And this is a climate compact that was fully ratified in 2010. It's comprised of 4 counties and 110 local and tribal governments, which comprise 6 million residents in the Southeast Florida region. And it's heavily focused on allowing for collaboration with amongst local governments to address climate impacts and solutions at scales beyond its boundaries. So Palm Beach isn't necessarily just focused on Palm Beach, but recognizing that the issues there are similar to Miami-Dade and in Monroe County. And so our role at ISC is we serve as the backbone entity of the compact. So we coordinate all of their convenings. We are there to be thought partners for them, to provide technical assistance when it comes to addressing the issues of sea level rise and flooding, and also heat. As Kelly was telling me that right now it's 83 degrees for you all, and that's unseasonably warm. So it's pretty it's a big issue when it comes to climate change. And so the role of the Climate Compact in our role and our work there is to build the capacity of local governments and to support peer learning. And I just want to mention that over the past few years, we've been working with the Southeast Florida Compact to develop a climate assessment tool. And this is something that the counties have been engaging their municipalities and regional planning councils in to really be able to understand how to prioritize mitigation and adaptation strategies. And within the CCAT tool, the compact and all of the participants were very clear that equity must be embedded across all of the actions through the partnership with equity advisors. So in addition to being able to identify, track, and report on mitigation and adaptation strategies, equity is embedded throughout that process as well. And then finally, I just want to mention to you all that we work with the Southeast Florida Compact, but there are also additional regional climate collaboratives throughout Florida. So there is one in the greater Tampa region. We're not involved in that one, but I would definitely encourage you all to, maybe reach out and get engaged with some of the work that these regional climate collaboratives are doing. And then finally, I just want to leave you all with just a question of, where do you all see yourselves in centering equity and climate resilience? And I hope that today, just my presentation might have sparked some questions or thoughts, or might compel you to think a little bit differently about the work that you all are doing. And with that, I'll pause and take any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Sonia, for that brief and very well done presentation. So we have quite a few, about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So questions, please unmute your microphone and ask questions. Okay, I have a hand up here. Liz Bean.
Yes, I'd like to know, you said it's too late for mitigation, but not for resilience. I would like you to give an example of both of those words.
Sure. So for us, when we're talking about the communities in which we work in that are being plagued by flooding, to be able to mitigate strategies, it's too late because at this point, anytime it rains in Detroit or in New Orleans, they're having significant flooding. So what we focus on is helping to support the communities to be able to continue to thrive, because climate change is only getting worse. So whenever there's rain events, the situation is getting worse. So we just feel that in those communities, we can't stop climate change from happening. That mitigation is just not feasible within those communities, but to help them to be able to adapt and thrive and continue to live without having to continuously be shoveling out water in their basement is what we are focused on. And so that is done through the installation of green infrastructure to help combat some of the flooding within their communities.
Again, could you give an example? For example, is mitigation building a wall against sea level rise, for example, and resilience is in
Yeah,
what
sure. Yeah.
Type of?
Right. Yeah. So for us, mitigation would be to quite literally to be able to stop climate change from happening. And so that is something that is not feasible. So within the communities in which we're serving, we can't necessarily be changing how the frequency of how rain is happening. So mitigation strategies such as, well, I mean, for you all with sea level rise, sure, I could envision a wall. We just don't think that that would be feasible because sea level is going to continue to rise. So do you just continue to build the wall, or do you think about other strategies that would be able to allow folks to not have to move from the communities in which they live in? Does that help?
For example, though, New Orleans is a flood area, and it has been for thousands of years. It's a delta where all sorts of rivers are tributaries into that delta. I mean, it seems to me moving would be a good idea.
Yeah, but that might be for you who doesn't live there, but unfortunately for the folks that do live there, moving is not a strategy for them. And there is a history of why folks live where they do within New Orleans, because that was the only place that they were zoned to be able to afford. And a lot of those homes are intergenerational homes where folks have been living for generations. And there's not a feasibility for them to just up and move from those areas because they don't necessarily have a place to go. And so that's why for us, we really center equity in acknowledging racism from the past and why conditions are in certain communities the way that they are. And it's not feasible. And people shouldn't have to just up and move, because that's not the reality for folks. And that isn't something that people might have the means of doing, is just to move. Where would they go?
Okay, thanks. Kelly, I see a lot of questions are put in the chat area. Would you like to read
Dean.
them? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. We also have a hand raised from, I pronounced Lise Bean. Is Lise there?
No, I've already asked my questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So we have a question from Malik Hall. He asks, how do infrastructure bills and policy affect your work?
Yeah, so we've been really closely monitoring infrastructure bills. And so what we've been doing is working within our local and regional governmental partnerships that we have to keep an eye on what's happening on the federal infrastructure side, as well as if there are other state infrastructure bills to help with centering equitable climate solutions within local regions. We do work on the policy front, but we are focused more so on supporting our community partners to be able to advocate for policies that seem most feasible for them. I will say that the infrastructure, the challenge is that every city has different processes when it comes to how funding is allocated. And so our approach is to work within each individual cities to get more of a lay of the land and then empower our community partners to just be further involved in the decision-making process. But
Thank you, Sonia.
But I will say that we are hoping that, in particular with federal infrastructure or the bills, that this would be complementary to centering climate equity, because that's something that we keep hearing pretty regularly from the Biden-Harris administration.
Okay, we have another question in the chat for you, please. This is from Mallory, our returning Peace Corps volunteer. She asked the question, is ISC looking, hi Mallory, is ISC looking to create a community-led cohort in the Tampa Bay region?
Yeah, so we're always open to creating our partnerships throughout the United States. So if there are issues that you all think would be nice to engage a partnership with, then we are happy to have that conversation.
Thank you.
We have a question, Sonia, from Mazi Ferguson. He's the director for USF Community Engagement. Mazi, do you have a question?
I do. I'm going to keep my camera off. I'm driving. But I wanted to know if you all have any partnerships with universities that can come alongside you as you work with the local communities, and if so, how have those partnerships been shaped? And can you give me an example of an area of the country where that's happening?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We haven't had explicit partnerships with universities, but I don't think that that is because of not being interested. It's just our focus has been on working with community-based organizations and local governments. But I certainly think that, especially when it comes to doing more of the research side of things, that there would be opportunities for greater partnerships with higher education.
Well, that's exactly why I asked. And I am wondering if I'm driving, so I can't write anything down. I barely was able to watch any of your presentation. But I was wondering if there'd be a space where I could connect with you later. I am also on the board of an international organization called the EPIC Network. And as such, I also manage a program here at the university where we connect with faculty to utilize their existing courses to go out and do some of that work with our cities. And it would be nice to also be able to bring in that kind of work with local community organizations as well. Dr. Dorsey is currently doing that with a project with a city close to here And ironically, they are doing some mitigation. So I thought that was interesting to hear you talk about that. But I will also say they may also be a slightly more wealthy area. So they might feel like they can stem the tide a little more than some of the communities that you're speaking of.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my contact information, and then we could set up an additional time to talk.
Okay, great. Kelly, would you be able to get that to me?
I sure can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mazi, for that question. Sonia, we have a question in the chat box from Sharon. She writes, how can we help people recognize that many of their experiences are caused by climate/environment when the problems of racism, housing, and poverty?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention with the Partnership for Resilient Communities is the community-based organizations that we work with, they would not classify themselves as being environmental organizations. They are community organizations that are addressing social inequities within their communities. However, they've been able to make the connection points that, this chronic flooding that keeps making the power go out within our community, and that folks are being impacted by energy insecurity and energy burden is because of climate and the environment. So when I talk about technical assistance and building capacity, it's really to build their knowledge on the connection points of these social issues, being many of them stemming from environment, or that they are connected to climate and health, that they're not separate issues. And so I think that the more that folks can start talking about these issues as being interconnected, that housing insecurity and poverty has a connection point to being climate, because of climate, or just what was talked about earlier about just climate and displacement, that, it's not that easy for folks that have live in a community to just up and leave a community because of climate injustices that are occurring. Those are stemming from legacy issues of racism, historic redlining, poverty, etc. So I think that it's really incumbent on all of us to be making those connection points. And when we're having conversations with people and they're talking about health, to bring it to, okay, is the health issues because there's the lack of produce, because the area in which people might be living in is a food desert, because there's, vacant land that's not being utilized. Could we be utilizing that area as green infrastructure that also includes providing community gardens? I think the more we can make those connections and start talking about these issues as being holistic, that will allow us to move towards being resilient rather than thinking about issues as being siloed.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Sonia? Would anyone else like to ask a question?
If I may, Sonia, since you work in other countries, can you give us some examples of your work? Are they independent organizations, or do you have some coordination? How does the organization work?
Sure. So we are, I will say that the Institute for Sustainable Communities, being a global organization, logistically, it's very difficult for us to all be working on the same time zone, for one. So what we do is we have different country programs. I'm part of the US programs, but the work that is being done in particular in Asia is complementary. So our approach is the same. My India and China colleagues are also working with community-based organizations. But as I mentioned in the beginning, they're also addressing and working with factories and with manufacturing. That's the only difference. We don't have that as part of our portfolio. But the work is on addressing those that are being most impacted by climate change. They have a water program that is being done, a Women in Water program. But in terms of climate resiliency, our China work is very similar to the Partnership for Resilient Communities, but there is a little bit of differences in some of the approaches that they're using, because within India and China, the focus is on gender equity as opposed to racial equity, just because of the communities there all in some regards. And there's been some discussion, a little bit of debate amongst staff of, representing the same race, but that's not recognizing different ethnicities within China and India. But the approaches are the same, where we work with partnering with community-based organizations, provide technical assistance and build capacity, and then also work with local and regional governments to embed equitable climate strategies within the work that is being done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I see one hand has gone up. Last question. I don't know whose hand that is. So
Hi, Sonia. This
Ego.
is Brandon Johnson. I had a question on your engagement and the community support. How do you bridge that gap of engagement versus need in some of these communities? A lot of times in community events, you will have in outreach events, you end up with the sector of the community that is interested or engaged or has a level of background that are showing up. You end up preaching to the choir in some aspects, and in some cases that can create additional barriers to reaching portions of the community that can be even more vulnerable or further away from the topic. So I'm wondering, you have that network of climate leaders that you mentioned. So I'm wondering, how do you identify the community members that you support through that program? And then also, what is the time frame for a lot of your programs? Are these project-based or more programmatically based? I'm sure that may change depending on the scenario, but yeah, I guess that gap in that engagement is one of the tougher parts of that community engagement. And like you said, then bridging that gap to making those connections to climate versus what a community may see as an issue, and providing that link back to climate is another step past that.
Yeah, so we're very much vested in success within the communities in which we work in. And so we set up, when we are entering into developing partnerships with community organizations, we do an application process where we ask a series of questions of folks. And we do this to really ensure success of the work on the ground, and also to assess what the needs and the issues are within the communities in which we're partnering. So I mentioned with the Partnership for Resilient Communities, the focus of that work is to address urban flooding, urban heat island effect, and energy insecurity. And so the projects that we ask folks to basically develop in their application what their plan is to be able to install green infrastructure or to develop a resilience hubs to address the issues within the community. But we want to ensure that the project plans are to scale that they have additional support. We provide funding to them, but we are unable to provide all of the funding to address all of the issues. And then we work with our partners through having, regular meetings with them. We do site visits, we do regular check-ins just to ensure that the needs within the community aren't shifting, that the community organizations that we're working with, because as I mentioned, many of them are addressing multiple societal issues, but they're still able to have success in addressing and meeting their climate resiliency work. So our project for our programs, generally they're 3 years. And so we do that in that knowing that a 1-year kind of cycle is not successful. But being a nonprofit organization, our biggest limitation is continuing and sustaining funding for our partners. But we've been grateful and lucky enough that the partners that we have, we've been able to, at this point, we've kept on for 5 years. And then the hope is that during that time, they're also able to, through our technical assistance offerings that we provide, they're able to make additional connections and relationships with other foundations or with their governments, local governments. So there's additional funding to realize the greater need of the work that needs to be done. Or for example, I showed the Resilience Hub within Richmond, Virginia. We provided funding for that, but we didn't have the funding to support the installation of the solar panels. But we connected Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative with the Honnold Foundation. They were able to write a proposal and were able to secure additional funding to be able to install the solar panels. So for us, it's really just to ensure that our partners are supported, are able to get their projects off the ground, and that they are continued to be able to tap into our technical assistance and capacity building. But really, when we talk about building capacity, it's that they can continue to work and move the work forward without necessarily, relying on one organization to be the conduit for that support.
Okay, I think our time is up. So let me thank Sonia Joshi for this very interesting presentation, making your time to spend with us this afternoon. And also I want to thank all the people who asked questions, and Kelly for organizing this event, and Deepak for doing the technical work background in the behind the scenes. So thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.